Hello and welcome back to the Nasty Metal production channel here at YouTube, and welcome to another album of the week. This, of course, is episode number 60. Since tomorrow will mark the 40th anniversary for, of course, the debut album from, of course, metal giant Iron Maiden. For everyone, 40 years for, of course, again, an album that is definitely considered one of the classic debut albums of all time. And of course, Iron Maiden being one of those that definitely kind of broke out during the whole new wave of British heavy metal movement. These bands, pretty much Iron Maiden along with Saxon, and to definitely, to some extent, of course, Def Leppard were definitely three of the biggest of those bands, and Iron Maiden probably being one of the huge, probably next to Def Leppard in some ways, as just as far as when it comes to just sales or everything, were just as bigger, if not probably just even bigger than Def Leppard in many ways, because I think if you look up a lot of the statistics and the sales and just the overall merch and stuff, I think Iron Maiden is for sure the hands down the biggest band to come out of the new wave of British heavy metal movement. I mean, you can't really go anywhere and not see Iron Maiden's logo, or at least anything of their mascot related, being Eddie the Head or so. You know, you're not gonna see it. It's very difficult to actually to not see at least these iconic things that kind of from Iron Maiden. It's like Iron Maiden for sure, definitely one of the most iconic bands, and this is the album that started it all, basically. I mean, prior to that, they had the Soundhouse tapes, which was a 7-inch actually. Technically, it came from a whole demo tape that was played at the Soundhouse, which was an old club during the late 70s, I believe, up to at least early 80s, and ended up being just as much of played a big part in that sort of new wave of British heavy metal movement. But Iron Maiden were one of the premier bands that get any exposure from there. And then it came to, of course, Sound Magazine, and of course then finally getting picked by EMI Records, and of course even some places Harvest Records and Capitol and that to release their debut full-length album, which is right here. Which where do I actually start with this album? Before I really get into any of sort of the in-depth look in some of these songs, and look at some of the differences between the U.S. American pressings and of course the European pressings, for extent, especially UK pressings. We'll have to should point out this is the only full-length album the featured guitar player Dennis Stratton, which after the sound would then get replaced by Adrian Smith, which of course Dave Murray and Adrian Smith were originally at one point were in the band Urchin for a little while. But Adrian Smith would then replace Dennis Stratton after the sound, and enough said, really. And of course, this is the, I guess, for at least a wider audience to some extent, this definitely was, at least for some, maybe one of the first tastes for vocalist Paul Di'Anno. Of course, prior to this, was probably the second or third singer, because of, I think originally the first singer, I believe, was, let me look up real quick. I'm starting to kind of forget one of the earliest singers for this band. Let me see here real quick before I go on ahead any further. Oh god, where is this fucking guy at? Jeez. Dennis Wilcock was, of course, the original singer. Then, of course, after that, also came, oh God, Paul Mario Day, who, of course, after that would then be in bands like More, and then, of course, Wildfire. But then replacing him would, of course, be Paul Di'Anno. And again, enough said. So here, finally, we got at least at this point, this is kind of one of the for at least for the full length album is probably a pretty decent representation of some of the earliest lineup for Iron Maiden. But what an album you would say. I mean, this is a great debut album. And it definitely took me, I will have to say, it definitely took me a few years to really appreciate to my opinion, the brilliance of this album. This is definitely a bit of a raw album because it was produced by producer Will Malone. And I know on record both Steve Harris and even Paul Di'Anno most recently has definitely have showed their little their opinions towards the production, which of course is them not being too fond of the production for the album. To be quite honest, they weren't completely satisfied with it, and I think for Steve Harris, he probably would have wanted, for an example, the guy that let me go over to here would be Martin Birch. I think originally they wanted Martin Birch, but I guess according to Martin Birch's words, they just weren't yet weren't ready to actually yet go that further to get a very a veteran producer to produce their album. So that's why they probably went with Will Malone. But now if you talk to Steve Harris, or at least to some extent Paul Di'Anno, they probably would have wanted Martin Birch to begin with. But if you ask me, I think that the production in some ways kind of elevates some of the feel for the album because of, while yes, it probably would have sounded a little tighter with at least Martin Birch behind the mixing board. I for sure would think, in some ways it would have taken away a little bit of the youthfulness and that sort of early new wave or British heavy metal feel from the sound, because this is probably one of the most new wave of British heavy metal sounding stuff from at least Iron Maiden. Just in my opinion, it definitely has that kind of 7-inch feel to some of this album. I mean, it kicks off with, of course, Prowler, which is a fucking classic. It's just classic material. And of course, you got probably one of the again up there is can be considered as a bit of a ballad, which would be Remember Tomorrow, but I would almost put the Remember Tomorrow a bit up there next to like Beyond the Realms of Death from Judas Priest. It just has that kind of feel, but it starts off very proggy, which of course kind of shows where their influences were definitely come from. Besides the fact having that sort of almost real straight up raw rock and roll feel, very, I guess, side of proto-punkish in some aspect, even though Steve Harris will deny about any sort of that, which is, there is some truth to it. It just, in terms of the overall feel of some of this, just has that, but it's more so just straight up new wave or British heavy metal style here. Then, of course, you got one of my personal favorites from the sound being Running Free. Now, I didn't really hear this version until I really went and listened when I first heard this album. I didn't really hear Running Free, this version at least, until like 2008. Because the first time I ever heard the song Running Free was the Bruce Dickinson version, actually, which was featured on the Best of the Beast comp. But still, it's one of my favorites from the sound. Then, of course, you've got one of the most iconic tracks off this one, besides the one I'll get to a little later. That's, of course, is the 7-minute and 20-second Brilliance of Phantom of the Opera. Which is, this is definitely classic Iron Maiden. This is a great track. I mean, it starts off very, very cool and everything. It's just classic Iron Maiden. I don't need to come up with any words to kind of really describe the song and everything. It's just classic. Now, I guess I will definitely also start pointing out some of the differences between the U.S. and European versions for this track, because initially, again, the song is 7 minutes and 20 seconds on at least the European pressings, and of course now reverted back to that time length on the most recent CD reissues for this album, which of course came out again 2018 actually, but using the 2015 remasters. Still, the difference is that on the U.S. pressings, it cut down the length because they took out the little vocal coda feel from the end of the track, which was like a hidden little track or so. It's of just, what is it? Here we go. You torture me back at your liar, whatever, or at your lair. Yeah, fuck her. I'm just looking at the lyrics here. It's like, you torture me back at your lair, which that little coda which comes back within after a couple of seconds of silence or so. Again, is one of the reasons why I kind of stretched the length of the track, and it was only for that, at least on the European pressings, which a lot of the U.S. pressings got rid of that, which shortened the length of the song. But still, now with the recent reissues from 2018, which uses the 2015 remasters, which reverted back to that length, which reinstated that little vocal coda effect coda, whatever, that was only can be found or heard on at least the European pressings for the album. But it's definitely a cool little piece, and definitely just a little cool little factoid, I guess you could say. It's a cool little fact. And then, of course, side B, we then kick off with Transylvania, which is definitely one of their best instrumentals for sure. Probably up there along with my Genghis Khan or Lost for Words. Definitely, it's a great instrumental from Iron Maiden. Definitely great. Let me kind of look up, open up one of the U.S. pressing for it, because I'm going to have to get also the track listing. Where the fuck is this at? Here we go, right here. Here we go. And of course, Strange World, which is when I was talking about Remember Tomorrow as being a bit of a ballad, and then kind of I went and redacted those opinions a bit, and kind of comparing Remember Tomorrow to more like Beyond the Realms of Death. Strange World is definitely the straight up ballad for this album. It's definitely prog-ish for sure, but I would say it's definitely a pretty cool ballad from Iron Maiden. It's very, very, very progressive in some aspects. It's definitely a great track, though very typical of most of the new wave of British heavy metal at the time, which were kind of experimenting with these kind of similar, almost very phasey effect style ballads, where all of it has that almost somewhat British psychedelic kind of feel to some of it. They've been where they are just. It's very typical of what you would get from a lot of that, but Iron Maiden were definitely ones that were for sure were really doing a lot of that, and Strange World is definitely one of those examples. It's definitely a good track for sure. Now let's definitely kind of move over to the U.S. press, because on the U.S. pressing, instead of Charlotte the Harlot being track number 7, instead with track number 7 would have been the song Sanctuary, which is a re-recording of the track that would have been on, oh god, I think the very first Metal from Mother's Comp, which also featured an early version of the song Wrathchild. But Sanctuary originally was on the Metal from Mother's compilation. But here on the US pressings featured a re-recorded version that was recorded during the sessions. And it's a good version, but I think I still somewhat prefer maybe the Metal from Mother's version for the song Sanctuary. But this would have been in the place on the US pressing, which would have extended the song, the track listing to about 9 tracks instead of 8 tracks, which was on the UK pressing. So here on the UK pressing, instead, number 7 is Charlotte the Harlot, which is a classic Iron Maiden track too. Definitely one of my favorites off this album. It's a great fucking track. And of course, track number 8, along with Phantom of the Opera. This is one of the iconic tracks, and I think, and Claudia Malder definitely said this is definitely one of the quintessential, I guess, band titled Alice songs, because it's just titled Iron Maiden. It's named after them, and it's a classic track. And for pretty much ever since this album, this song has always been on their live sets. This is basically a live staple for Iron Maiden. The title track is like, it's always going to be played at every one of the shows, no matter what. It's basically a anthem to this band, along with many songs, let's say like Phantom of the Opera or Running Free. This is a anthem. It's a crowd pleaser. This is definitely one of those that definitely gets the crowd popping. It's a great track and a great way to end the album. So there you go, the debut album from Iron Maiden. What a classic! There's just nothing bad for me on this album. I mean, sure. They definitely continued after this, and there's still some great albums that came after this one. But sometimes, because of also the anniversary here, its 4th anniversary, you definitely have to, for once in a while, have to definitely go back and take I guess in a way, bask in the glory of basically of this album. You have to definitely for a while, every once in a while, just go back and definitely reminisce on what an album that definitely kicked off a luxurious career for this band. This is definitely one of the quintessential albums for Iron Maiden for sure. No matter even if you don't care for, of course, the Paul Di'Anno era, you definitely have to not. I can't say that this album didn't do good for the band. You can't say, because it did very well for the band. This is definitely, without this album, I don't know whether or not if the career would have ever been as, I guess you say, as good as it did. While definitely, it's very easy to say that part of the Bruce Dickinson era did I guess in a way also financially great for the band. But with this as the album that definitely it took them on that journey, and it definitely brought them up to where they are at this point. It still is a great fucking album, and it's a great debut. So at that, since this album hit its 4th anniversary, and probably because of this video, I bet you are going to pull this album out once again just to listen to it. You probably are inspired to, and it's a great album. So with that, for those that have definitely listened to this album or are very familiar, and I know plenty of you are familiar, definitely leave your comments down in the comment section below. So with that, I hope you all enjoyed this. Every Sam out. I'll see you all later. Take care, everyone.